The Wooden Prince is a ballet composed by Béla Bartok, a Hungarian composer known for his collection of folk melodies. In this podcast, we will discuss to what extent the use of fairy tale for the Wooden Prince is a response to Wagner's return to Greek myth. First, let's have a very brief look at Bartok's history. Bartok was born in 1881, meaning that he began composing in the Post-Wagnerian period, after 1883. In Wagner's wake were many ideas, philosophically and musically, that needed to be answered by the next generation of composers. Bartok had taken an interest in folk music in his youth, but it was in 1904 when he began to collect folk melodies relating to Hungary. Some of the collected melodies have been integrated into Bartok's work, though unlike previous ethnomusicologists, Bartok preserved the irregular rhythms and unusual tonal aspects. Peter Herring believes that Bartok's preservation of these qualities make his contribution to the progression of music on a similar level to Schoenberg and Stravinsky, especially for moving towards atonality. The Wooden Prince isn't Bartok's only stage production. Two of his most well-known are the opera Duke Bluebeard's Castle and the ballet The Miraculous Mandarin. Duke Bluebeard's Castle was his first theatrical work, written in 1911. However, its official premiere was in 1918, which was the same year as The Miraculous Mandarin was performed. The Wooden Prince was performed before either in May 1917 at the Royal Hungarian Opera House, with its libretto officially published in 1912. With the ballet being composed after Duke Bluebeard, The Wooden Prince has been viewed as lighter and less adventurous in the eyes of critics like Stephen Kilpatrick. Hence, it has become one of Bartok's lesser-known works. The Wooden Prince was a collaborative work between Bartok and Béla Bartok, the librettist. In the letters sent between the two, discussed by Okamoto, Bartok referred to the conceptual idea of the ballet as a grotesque pantomime. As mentioned earlier, the ballet is set within a fairy tale. The main plot of the work is that a travelling prince falls in love with the distant image of a princess. As he begins to journey through the forest to reach her, his advances are thwarted by a fairy, who turns the trees and rivers against him. To gain the princess's attention, he adorns his staff with his crown, cloak and hair and holds it up to the castle. It works, and the princess rushes out of the castle to take the Wooden Prince, ignoring the prince himself. The Wooden Prince is brought to life for the princess by the fairy, leaving the real prince in despair. The fairy, pitying the prince, returns the wooden staff to a lifeless state. The princess, angry with the unmoving doll, then seeks the real prince, and after her own struggles through the forest, reunites and embraces the prince. Now that we have some basic knowledge regarding the Wooden Prince, let's return to the original question. To what extent is the use of fairy tale a response to Wagner's return to Greek myth? One factor that links both ideas is their use of nature. Let's begin by examining what Wagner thought about nature and its relation to Greece, which is discussed by Anastasia Siopsi. The arts were perceived by romantics of the 19th century as a pure and natural creation. For Wagner, the ideal form of art was from ancient Greece, where much of its contents were based on myths. He believed that Greek art had immediate contact with nature. The drama, therefore, was considered the perfect work of art, as it embodied the union of nature with humanity. Modern art, however, was violently debarred from nature. Siopsi believes this ideology drove Wagner's musical development, with the end goal culminating in the reunion of nature and humanity. The origin for this line of thought may have been adopted from the philosopher Nietzsche, whose view of nature, with a capital N, supports the idea of balancing forces. However, for Nietzsche, the balance was between Apollonian and Dionysian forces, based on the Greek gods. Apollo is connected to order, perfection, and logic, whilst Dionysus represents irrationality, raw emotion, and chaos. Whilst Apollo is the preferred state of being, Nietzsche believed some Dionysian elements are necessary to purge the alluring emotions that invite disorder and provide contentment. This was especially necessary for a drama. The issue with 19th century drama, and the reason why both Nietzsche and Wagner had problems, was that there was no Dionysian cleanse. Apollo was victorious without challenge. In comparison to the large-scale intention that surrounds Wagner's concept of nature, Bartok's interpretation may appear more literal. The fairy of this tale is Bartok's embodiment of nature. Within the story, the fairy is the one to command the trees and rivers to turn against the prince and princess, as well as bringing to life the wooden prince. You could interpret the fairy's existence as a Dionysian incarnation, disrupting the scripted fate of the prince and princess, only for them to unite with stronger passion for one another. However, I don't believe this to be Bartok's intention, due to the musical accompaniment. Abram Chipman states that C is the pedal point for nature that connects the overall ballet, with both the opening and ending being in the key of C, with the tonic triad as the opening and closing bars. The opening sequence of ascending triadic notes is actually similar to a Wagnerian leitmotif used in Das Rheingold for nature. Both melodic ideas may have been chosen for their reflection of the natural harmonic series. There is also a section at the beginning of the Dance of the Trees, where the bass parts, though they attempt to ascend, always return to C. Later on in the same dance, there is almost a fanfare-like bass motif, with C and G alternating. Perhaps it is coincidence, but having C used in a prominent role that's connected to nature may have been to oppose Wagner's complex ideas revolving around the subject. C is considered the simplest key after all, with no sharps or flats in its key signature. This could also be Bartok's commentary on other Wagnerian ideas, such as the Tristan chord, named after the opera it was heard in abundance, Tristan and Isolde, whose concept revolves around continual yearning for a resolution to the chord that does not occur until the end of the opera. Instead, Bartok offers the audience a fixed idea of nature in The Wooden Prince. It is possible to suggest that Bartok's response to Wagner's works fall into the idea of simplification. Of course, I don't mean this disrespectfully in terms of the quality of Bartok's writing, but sometimes stating things in an obvious manner is the most effective way to communicate an idea. That is what I believe Bartok's answer appears to be. Another example that supports the idea of simplification would be Bartok's use of motifs. The specific section I wish to discuss occurs as the prince is desperately trying to gain the princess's attention with the wooden staff. There are two motifs which contrast greatly against each other. The first is associated with the princess, heard in the opening of the Dance of the Princess in the Forest. The contrasting motif is a rapidly ascending scale with a sudden stop that is heard accompanying the prince at the moment he falls in love with the princess. When the prince is attempting to gain the princess's attention, these themes appear almost as a call and response. The prince offers his staff and is rejected by the light-hearted theme that does not match the tone of his desperation. The princess's ignorance of his existence and the prince's own despair are exaggerated by the contrasting emotions evoked by each motif standing on its own. There is silence to musically show the distance between the characters and distinctly separate their motifs. Although, when discussing motivic use, we also must note that using motifs to identify a character or event in such a manner is often considered a Wagnerian inspiration due to Wagner's association with the leitmotif. In this case, Bartok does not appear to be fully rejecting Wagner's musical ideas. If we look generally at The Wooden Prince, moving away from the musical specificity, the setting of the story within a fairy tale could be considered a form of simplicity. The Wagnerian mythological-based tragedies are considered as epics. There are aspects within their stories that are meant to represent something greater than oneself that each person can relate to, a universal truth embodied by facets of the gods Apollo and Dionysus, according to Stephen Mulhall. Bartok choosing a fairy tale is quite a humble response. Fairy tales are predictable and are known to a similar extent as some folklore. And whilst there is the idea of a heroic quest to gain the love of the princess, it isn't the same as the universal epic. There are interpretations of the Wooden Prince that believe the ballet is representing Bartok's personal difficulties rather than a universal idea. Chipman has suggested that the struggles between the prince and his wooden self are mimicking the struggles of an artist with his creation. In a different argument, Kilpatrick believes that the love between the royals is a commentary on Georgy Lukács and Irma Seidler, and the sacrifices one must make for art. So, to summarise what we've discussed, Wagner has established that, in some form, his return to Greek mythology served a larger purpose of attempting to unite the arts of humanity with their natural form by using the universal aspects of Apollo and Dionysus. The Wooden Prince, being a fairy tale, is held in a separate world that immediately notifies the audience that the story is not to be expressively relatable nor realistic, with a predictably happy ending. Nothing as traumatic as the tragedies of Wagner imply. Bartok choosing a fairy tale may have been to offer the audience a simple escape, rather than trying to face the larger reality like Wagner was asking of his audiences. Thank you for listening.